Commander Zethkar stood 8 feet tall on the bridge of his flagship, his natural armor plates gleaming under the ship's lights. His razor-sharp claws tapped against the command console as he studied the data streaming across the holographic displays. For 300 years he had served the Valorian Dominion as their chief military strategist and xenobiologist. In that time, he had cataloged the fighting styles of 17 different alien species across the galaxy. Each race had their own approach to warfare, but they all followed predictable patterns that Zethkar understood completely. The Kroner fought with brute force, using massive weapons and overwhelming numbers. The Solari preferred stealth and poison, striking from shadows before disappearing into the void. The crystal-based Nethrim used energy weapons that could slice through starship hulls like paper. Every species had developed their combat methods based on their physical advantages and cultural beliefs. Zethkar had studied them all, learned their weaknesses, and helped the Valorian military defeat them when diplomacy failed. Now he faced something new. The long-range sensors had detected artificial signals coming from a small blue planet in the Outer Rim territories. The world orbited a yellow star and seemed unremarkable except for one thing: it was home to a species that had just achieved faster-than-light travel. The Valorian High Command had ordered Zethkar to make first contact and assess whether these newcomers posed any threat to the Dominion. The initial scans were not impressive. The aliens called themselves humans and appeared to be small, soft-skinned creatures with no natural weapons or armor. Their technology lagged decades behind even the weakest members of the galactic community. Their ships were crude metal constructions powered by fusion reactors and armed with primitive kinetic weapons. By all measures, they should have been easy to understand and classify. Zethkar's fleet approached the human solar system slowly, broadcasting standard diplomatic frequencies. The humans responded quickly, which was encouraging. Many primitive species either attacked immediately or cowered in fear when first encountering advanced civilizations. The human message was simple and direct. They welcomed peaceful contact and invited the Valorian delegation aboard their largest vessel for formal negotiations. The human ship was called the USS Liberty, and Zethkar found its design fascinating in its simplicity. Where Valorian vessels were built for intimidation and displays of power, the Liberty seemed purely functional. Every component served a specific purpose with no wasted space or decorative elements. The docking bay was clean and efficient, with repair equipment and supply storage organized in neat rows. Captain Jake Morrison met Zethkar at the airlock. The human commander was shorter than expected, standing barely 6 feet tall with graying hair and calm brown eyes. He wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decorations, nothing like the elaborate ceremonial armor that Valorian officers displayed during important meetings. Morrison's handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his smile seemed genuine rather than diplomatic. "Welcome aboard the Liberty, Commander Zethkar," Morrison said in accented but clear galactic standard. "We're honored to meet representatives of the Valorian Dominion. Your reputation as skilled warriors precedes you." Zethkar nodded respectfully. "The honor is mine, Captain Morrison. Your species has achieved faster-than-light travel faster than our models predicted. That speaks well of human ingenuity." Morrison led the delegation through the ship's corridors toward the main conference room. Along the way, Zethkar observed the human crew going about their duties. They moved with practiced efficiency, but without the rigid discipline he expected from a military organization. Officers and enlisted personnel interacted casually, sharing information and making decisions collaboratively rather than following strict, hierarchical chains of command. The conference room itself was plain and functional, with a large table surrounded by comfortable chairs. Morrison introduced his senior staff, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman who served as tactical officer, and Dr. Kevin Walsh, a quiet man with intelligent features who handled scientific research. Both humans studied the Valorian delegation with obvious curiosity but showed no signs of fear or hostility. "Before we begin formal negotiations," Morrison said, "we'd like to learn more about Valorian culture and military traditions. Dr. Walsh has prepared some questions that might help us understand each other better. Zethkar found this approach refreshing. Most species either tried to intimidate the Valorians immediately or submitted to their obvious physical superiority. The humans seemed genuinely interested in learning rather than establishing dominance. He spent the next hour explaining Valorian history, their warrior culture, and their belief in honorable combat between equals. Dr. Walsh asked surprisingly sophisticated questions about Valorian military doctrine and strategy. His inquiries revealed a sharp intellect hidden behind his mild appearance. The scientist wanted to know about command structures, logistics, weapon technologies, and tactical formations. He listened carefully to each answer and asked follow-up questions that showed he understood the implications of what he was learning. Lieutenant Rodriguez remained mostly silent during these exchanges, but Zethkar noticed her eyes constantly moving as she assessed the Valorian officers. She was clearly evaluating their equipment, weapons, and physical capabilities without being obvious about it. Her tactical mind was working even during peaceful negotiations, filing away information that might be useful later. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden alarm that echoed through the Liberty's corridors. A junior officer rushed into the conference room with urgent news that made everyone's blood run cold. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet of biomechanical ships entering the solar system. The distinctive energy signatures could only mean one thing: the swarm had arrived. Zethkar felt his armor plates instinctively tighten as adrenaline flooded his system. The swarm was every civilized species' nightmare, a hive-minded collective that consumed entire worlds to fuel their endless expansion. Their bioships were grown rather than built, and they attacked in overwhelming numbers that crushed all resistance. Through sheer mass, dozens of star systems had fallen to their relentless advance over the past century. The tactical display showed hundreds of swarm vessels moving toward the inner system where both human and Valorian ships waited. The enemy fleet outnumbered their combined forces by at least 10 to 1. With more ships arriving through dimensional portals every minute. By traditional military logic, the situation was hopeless. Morrison studied the display with calm concentration, while his officers worked frantically at their stations. "How long until they reach effective weapons range?" he asked Rodriguez. "Approximately 4 hours at their current speed," she replied. "They're not trying to hide their approach." Classic swarm tactics, overwhelming force applied directly. Zethkar prepared to suggest the traditional Valorian response to such odds: form battle lines, challenge their strongest ships to single combat, and die with honor if victory proved impossible. But before he could speak, Morrison turned to him with an expression that was both determined and calculating. "Commander, we'd like to propose joint tactical operations against the swarm," Morrison said. "Our ships aren't powerful enough to face them alone, and I suspect yours aren't numerous enough. But together we might have options that neither of U.S. possesses separately." The human captain's words carried no trace of fear or desperation. Instead, Zethkar heard something he had never encountered before: absolute confidence that victory was possible despite impossible odds. Morrison spoke as if defeating a vastly superior enemy force was simply another problem to be solved through proper application of intelligence and resources. As alarms continued to sound and both fleets prepared for battle, Zethkar realized he was about to witness something entirely new in his 3 centuries of military experience. The humans were not preparing to die heroically or surrender gracefully. They were planning to win, and they seemed to believe they actually could. For the first time in his long career, the Valorian commander found himself genuinely curious about how another species approached the art of war. The moment the swarm fleet appeared on sensors, Zethkar expected Captain Morrison to begin standard defensive preparations. Any civilized species would form their ships into battle lines, assign escort formations, and prepare for honorable combat according to established military traditions. Instead, Morrison did something that made no sense at all. "All human vessels implement Scatter Protocol 7, Morrison announced over the fleet communications channel. "Begin evasive maneuvers and prepare for distributed engagement patterns." Zethkar watched in growing confusion as the human ships immediately broke formation and spread out in seemingly random directions. Some vessels accelerated toward the approaching swarm fleet while others moved away from them. A few ships positioned themselves near asteroid fields while others hid behind the system's outer planets. To any trained military observer, it looked like complete chaos or outright cowardice. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar said carefully, trying not to sound insulting, "your fleet appears to be retreating. The Valorian Code of Honor requires us to meet our enemies in direct combat. We cannot support a withdrawal." Morrison turned to face the towering alien commander with the same calm expression he had worn throughout their earlier negotiations. "We're not retreating, Commander. We're positioning ourselves for maximum tactical advantage. Trust us and follow our lead. We have a plan." The human captain's confidence was puzzling. His ships were smaller and less powerful than Valorian vessels, with primitive weapons and basic defensive systems. Against the overwhelming numbers of the swarm, traditional tactics would result in total destruction within minutes. Yet Morrison spoke as if victory was not only possible but inevitable. Zethkar reluctantly ordered his ships to follow the humans' movements. Though his officers grumbled about abandoning proper military protocol, the Valorian fleet had trained for centuries in formation fighting, with each ship supporting its neighbors in organized battle lines. Scattering like frightened prey went against every instinct they possessed. As the swarm fleet approached, their biomechanical ships moved in perfect coordination. The organic vessels pulsed with internal light as they communicated through telepathic networks, sharing information and tactical decisions instantly across their entire force. They formed a classic engagement pattern: heavy assault ships in front, medium cruisers providing support fire, and smaller vessels ready to exploit any weaknesses in enemy formations. Then the humans began their attack, and Zethkar realized he was witnessing something completely unprecedented. Instead of engaging the swarm fleet directly, human ships struck at targets that seemed tactically irrelevant. Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated these attacks from the Liberty's bridge, her voice calm and precise as she directed seemingly random strikes against sensor arrays, communication nodes, and what appeared to be decorative features on swarm bioships. "Strike Team Alpha, target the crystalline formations on the lead cruiser's port side," Rodriguez ordered. "Beta Team, focus fire on the organic clusters near the engine sections of vessels 7 through 12. The human fighter squadrons moved like nothing Zethkar had ever seen in combat. Squadron leader Lisa Carter led her pilots in maneuvers that defied conventional tactical wisdom, diving between massive swarm vessels and striking at components that seemed to serve no military purpose. Her wingman Tony Blake followed impossible flight paths that brought his small craft within meters of bioship weapon systems, yet somehow avoided destruction. "This is madness," muttered Zethkar as tactical officer. "They're attacking random targets with no strategic value. The humans will be destroyed piecemeal." But as the battle continued, a pattern began to emerge. Dr. Walsh worked frantically at his science station, analyzing swarm biosignatures and feeding targeting data to the human fleet. His quiet voice provided constant updates that seemed to predict enemy movements before they happened. "Swarm formation Delta is shifting to compensate for damaged sensor clusters," Walsh reported. "They'll be vulnerable to flanking attacks in approximately 90 seconds. Carter's squadron should target their communication nodes now." Zethkar found himself reluctantly following human tactical suggestions, ordering his ships to strike at locations that seemed meaningless. His officers protested abandoning traditional honor-based combat, but the results were undeniable. The coordinated strikes were disrupting swarm formations in ways that direct ship-to-ship combat never could have achieved. The swarm began to respond to human tactics, but their reactions seemed sluggish and confused. Their perfect coordination started breaking down as communication networks suffered damage. Ships that had moved in flawless unison began making independent decisions that conflicted with their neighbors' actions. "Commander Zethkar," Morrison called over the communications channel, We need your heavy cruisers to target the biomechanical connections on swarm vessels 15 through 20. Don't aim for their weapons or engines. Hit the organic cables running along their hulls." Zethkar hesitated. Everything in his military training told him to target enemy weapons and propulsion systems. Attacking what appeared to be structural details went against 3 centuries of Valorian tactical doctrine. But the human strategy was working in ways he didn't understand, so he gave the orders. The Valorian heavy weapons tore through the organic cables that connected different sections of swarm bioships. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Vessels that had been coordinating their attacks suddenly began operating independently, with different sections firing at different targets or moving in opposite directions. "Excellent work," Rodriguez said approvingly. "You've just severed their internal command links. Those ships can't coordinate their weapon systems anymore." As the battle progressed, Zethkar began to see what the humans were doing. They weren't just fighting the swarm fleet. They were systematically dismantling the enemy's ability to function as a coordinated force. Each seemingly random attack served a greater strategic purpose, turning the swarm's size and organization against them. The human approach to warfare was completely different from anything Zethkar had encountered. Where his people fought for personal honor and individual achievement, humans fought like a single organism with many parts. Every ship, every pilot, every weapon strike was part of a larger plan that no individual warrior could fully comprehend. Dr. Walsh continued his analysis, identifying weak points and communication pathways that weren't visible to conventional sensors. Lieutenant Rodriguez translated this information into tactical orders that kept human casualties minimal while maximizing damage to enemy capabilities. Captain Morrison coordinated the entire operation with calm efficiency, treating the desperate battle like a complex engineering problem that could be solved through proper application of knowledge and resources. The swarm fleet began to show signs of real damage as their coordination broke down completely. Ships collided with each other as damaged communication systems sent conflicting orders. Weapon systems fired randomly as severed command links left individual ship sections operating independently. The perfect unity that made the swarm so dangerous was dissolving into chaos. Zethkar realized he was witnessing something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. The humans had turned combat into a science rather than an art, using analysis and intelligence instead of strength and courage. They fought not to prove their worth as warriors, but to achieve victory through any means necessary. For the first time in his long military career, the Valorian commander found himself learning from another species rather than teaching them. The humans were showing him that there were approaches to warfare that his people had never imagined, strategies that could defeat seemingly impossible odds through careful planning and coordinated execution. As the swarm fleet continued to fall apart under the relentless human assault, Zethkar began to understand that everything he thought he knew about military combat was about to change forever. The swarm fleet began adapting to human tactics faster than Zethkar had expected. The biomechanical ships started forming smaller, independent groups that could operate without centralized coordination. Their organic hulls rippled and changed as internal systems rerouted around damaged sections. What had seemed like certain victory for the human strategy suddenly became uncertain again. Dr. Walsh monitored these changes from his station on the Liberty's bridge, his fingers dancing across control surfaces as he analyzed the shifting patterns of swarm behavior. "They're learning from our attacks," he reported to Captain Morrison. "The hive mind is adapting their formations to counter our disruption tactics." Zethkar felt a familiar chill of dread. He had seen this before when fighting the swarm in other systems. Their ability to adapt and evolve during combat made them nearly impossible to defeat using conventional strategies. Once they understood an enemy's tactics, they became almost unstoppable. Most civilized species retreated at this point, hoping to escape before the swarm completed their adaptation. Instead, Morrison smiled with genuine satisfaction. "Perfect, that means they're ready for Phase 2. The human captain's reaction made no sense to Zethkar. Any rational commander would be concerned about enemy adaptation, not pleased by it. Yet Morrison seemed to have anticipated this development as part of his overall plan. The Valorian commander wondered what other surprises the humans had prepared. "All ships deploy the packages," Morrison announced calmly over the fleet communications channel. "Execute delivery pattern beta on my mark." Zethkar watched in confusion as human vessels began ejecting what appeared to be cargo containers into the void of space. The containers drifted slowly toward swarm formations, tumbling end over end without any apparent guidance systems or defensive capabilities. They looked like nothing more than abandoned supply pods that had been jettisoned to reduce ship weight. Some swarm vessels ignored the containers completely, focusing their attention on human ships that posed obvious threats. Others destroyed the drifting objects with casual weapon fire, treating them as minor debris that might interfere with their formations. The biomechanical ships continued their adaptive reorganization, seemingly unaware that anything significant had changed. Then the containers began to activate. Each package released a cloud of microscopic machines that spread rapidly through the surrounding space. The nanites were too small to be detected by conventional sensors, but their effect on swarm bioships was immediate and devastating. Dr. Walsh had programmed them with detailed information about swarm biosignatures, allowing them to mimic the electromagnetic patterns of human vessels. The effect was like watching a perfectly coordinated military force suddenly lose its collective mind. Swarm sensors began detecting phantom fleets wherever the nanite clouds drifted. Their targeting systems locked onto false contacts that appeared and disappeared randomly. Ships that had been working together moments before began firing on each other, convinced they were engaging human vessels. "Brilliant," Zethkar murmured as he watched the chaos unfold. "They're using the swarm's own coordination against them." Lieutenant Rodriguez nodded approvingly at his assessment. Dr. Walsh spent months studying captured swarm biotechnology. He discovered that their telepathic communication network relies on specific electromagnetic frequencies. The nanites broadcast false signals on those same frequencies, creating ghost images that the hive mind interprets as real threats. The swarm fleet dissolved into complete disorder as the nanite attack spread throughout their formations. Ships that had moved in perfect unison now fired randomly at imaginary enemies. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with confused energy as conflicting telepathic signals overwhelmed their collective consciousness. Some vessels fled toward empty space while others attacked their own support ships, but Rodriguez had identified something even more critical during her initial analysis of swarm formations. "Captain, I've located their command vessel," she reported. "It's the large bioship at coordinates 7-7-Mark-4. All telepathic control signals are originating from that location." Zethkar studied the tactical display and immediately understood the significance of her discovery. The swarm's collective consciousness required a central command node to maintain coordination across their entire fleet. If that vessel could be destroyed, the remaining bioships would lose all higher-level coordination and become vulnerable to conventional attacks. The command ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of any other vessel in the swarm fleet. Its organic hull bristled with defensive weapons and was surrounded by layers of escort vessels that formed an impenetrable protective barrier. Under normal circumstances, penetrating those defenses would require sacrificing dozens of ships in direct assault. Squadron leader Lisa Carter studied the tactical situation from her fighter's cockpit and came to a conclusion that chilled Zethkar's blood. "I can get through their defenses using the nanite chaos as cover," she announced over the communications channel. "But it'll be a one-way trip. My squadron won't be coming back from this run." The human pilot's words carried no trace of fear or hesitation. She spoke about her own death as casually as she might discuss weapon loadouts or fuel consumption. Her wingman Tony Blake and the other fighter pilots in her squadron voiced their agreement without any sign of reluctance or doubt. Morrison paused for a long moment before responding. "Carter, are you certain this is the only way?" "Yes, sir," she replied firmly. The Nanits have created a window of opportunity, but it won't last long. If we're going to take out their command ship, it has to be now. Zethkar found himself speaking before he fully realized what he was doing. Squadron Leader Carter, the Valorian fleet will provide escort support for your attack run. Our heavy cruisers can clear a path through their outer defenses. Carter's voice carried genuine gratitude when she responded. Thank you, Commander. It'll be an honor to fly with Valorian warriors. The combined attack began immediately. Valorian heavy cruisers moved into position around Carter's fighter squadron, their massive weapons clearing corridors through the confused swarm formations. The Nanit clouds provided perfect cover as enemy ships fired at phantom targets. Instead of the real threats approaching their command vessel, Carter led her pilots through the chaos with incredible skill, weaving between biomechanical hulls and avoiding defensive fire through maneuvers that seemed impossible. Her fighters carried specialized warheads designed by Dr. Walsh specifically to target the organic core of swarm command ships. The weapons would need to be delivered at point-blank range to penetrate the biomechanical armor protecting the vessels. Brain Center. Zethkar watched the attack unfold with growing admiration for human courage and tactical innovation. The fighter pilots flew with absolute precision despite knowing they faced certain death. Their formation never wavered as defensive fire destroyed first one, then two, then half their number. Carter continued leading the survivors toward their target even as her own ship took critical damage. The final assault succeeded beyond all expectations. Carter's remaining fighters penetrated the command ship's defenses and delivered their specialized warheads directly to the organic core. The enormous biovessel convulsed as its telepathic control center was destroyed, sending shock waves of neural feedback through the entire swarm fleet. With their command structure eliminated, the remaining swarm ships lost all coordination and higher-level intelligence. They continued fighting as individual vessels, but without the collective consciousness that made them so dangerous. The threat that had seemed overwhelming minutes before was suddenly manageable. As the last of Carter's squadron disappeared in brilliant explosions that marked their sacrifice, Zethkar realized he had witnessed something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. The humans hadn't just defeated a superior enemy force. They had done so through a combination of scientific analysis, tactical innovation, and personal sacrifice that went far beyond traditional concepts of military honor. The destruction of the swarm command ship sent shock waves through the entire enemy fleet. Without their central coordination, the remaining biomechanical vessels lost their collective intelligence and began operating as individual units. Some ships continued fighting with desperate aggression while others fled toward the edge of the solar system. Many simply drifted in space, their organic systems shutting down as the telepathic network that sustained them collapsed. Zethkar watched the aftermath unfold with mixed emotions. The victory was complete and decisive, exactly what military strategists dreamed of achieving against impossible odds. Yet the cost of that victory weighed heavily on his mind as he observed the human response to their losses. Nearly 40% of their small fleet had been destroyed or severely damaged. Squadron Leader Carter and most of her pilots were gone, along with dozens of other human officers who had sacrificed themselves to achieve tactical objectives. In Valorian culture, such losses would be mourned with elaborate ceremonies celebrating the honor and courage of fallen warriors. The names of the dead would be carved into memorial stones, and their deeds would be recounted in warrior songs for generations. Individual acts of heroism would be analyzed and praised, with particular attention paid to how each warrior had upheld the code of honor in their final moments. The human reaction was completely different, and far more disturbing to Zethkar's understanding of proper military tradition. Captain Morrison stood quietly on his damaged bridge, reading casualty reports with Dr. Walsh and Lieutenant Rodriguez. There were no victory celebrations or ceremonial displays of grief. Instead, the surviving crew members worked with methodical efficiency to clear debris, tend to wounded personnel, and restore damaged systems. When Morrison finally spoke about their fallen comrades, his words carried a weight that Valorian funeral rites could never match. They knew the job when they signed up, he said simply. Now we make sure their sacrifice wasn't wasted. The captain's statement revealed something fundamental about human military philosophy that Zethkar had never encountered before: the deaths of Carter and her squadron weren't glorious achievements to be celebrated. They were investments in a larger purpose that required careful protection. Their sacrifice would be meaningless if the survivors failed to capitalize on the victory they had made possible. Dr. Walsh approached Zethkar with a complete analysis of the battle, his quiet demeanor unchanged despite the chaos and destruction they had all witnessed. The data he presented showed that human tactics had achieved something unprecedented in galactic military history: total victory against a numerically superior swarm force with minimal collateral damage to civilian populations. The Nanite attack served multiple purposes, Walsh explained as he shared his findings. It disrupted their coordination, created targeting confusion, and prevented them from sending distress signals to other swarm fleets. No reinforcements will arrive, and the hive mind has no information about human capabilities or tactical methods. Zethkar studied the tactical analysis with growing amazement. Every aspect of the human battle plan had been designed not just to win the immediate engagement, but to prevent future threats and protect strategic information. The humans had fought with their minds as much as their weapons, thinking several moves ahead like chess masters, planning complex combinations. Lieutenant Rodriguez joined their conversation, bringing additional data about swarm capabilities and weaknesses that her team had discovered during the battle. We've identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their biomechanical systems, she reported. This information should help both our species prepare for future encounters. The willingness to share such valuable intelligence surprised Zethkar. In his experience, most species guarded their military discoveries jealously, using superior knowledge as leverage in diplomatic negotiations. The humans seemed more interested in strengthening their potential allies than maintaining tactical advantages for themselves. As repair crews worked to restore damaged systems, Zethkar found himself in extended conversations with the surviving human officers. They spoke about warfare not as a glorious endeavor or test of personal courage, but as a necessary evil that should be ended as quickly and efficiently as possible. Their strategies weren't designed to showcase individual prowess or cultural superiority. They were meant to minimize casualties while achieving decisive results that would prevent future conflicts. Dr. Walsh shared additional information about human military history that challenged everything Zethkar thought he understood about civilized combat. Humans had developed concepts that had no equivalent in Valorian culture: asymmetric warfare that used enemy strengths against them, combined arms tactics that coordinated different weapon systems for maximum effect, strategic deception that confused enemies about human capabilities and intentions, and the principle of overwhelming force applied at specific decisive points rather than distributed across entire battlefields. More importantly, Walsh explained the human understanding of war itself. For humans, warfare wasn't a test of individual courage or a display of cultural values. It was a problem to be solved through careful analysis, innovative thinking, and coordinated effort by entire populations rather than individual warriors. Victory belonged to those who could adapt fastest and think most creatively, not necessarily to those with the strongest weapons or bravest soldiers. Captain Morrison demonstrated this philosophy in his post-battle planning sessions. Instead of celebrating their victory or mourning their losses, he immediately began preparing for the next challenge. His staff analyzed everything they had learned about swarm tactics and technology, developed improved countermeasures for future encounters, and shared their findings with Valorian officers who would carry this knowledge back to their own military command. The human captain also proposed something that would have been impossible under traditional military protocols: joint training exercises between human and Valorian forces. We've both learned things from this engagement that could benefit our respective militaries, Morrison explained. Humans excel at tactical innovation and strategic analysis, while Valorians have superior individual combat skills and advanced weapon technologies. Combining our approaches could create something more effective than either of us could achieve alone. Zethkar found himself agreeing to proposals that would have seemed absurd days earlier. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that forced him to reconsider basic assumptions about military effectiveness and combat doctrine. Their willingness to sacrifice individual glory for collective success, their emphasis on intelligence over strength, and their treatment of warfare as a science rather than an art represented a fundamental shift in how conflict could be approached. As the combined fleets prepared to return to their respective territories, Zethkar reflected on everything he had witnessed. The humans had not only survived their first major space battle against overwhelming odds, they had redefined what galactic warfare could become. Their approach combined ruthless efficiency with genuine concern for minimizing casualties, strategic thinking with tactical flexibility, and individual sacrifice for goals that transcended personal achievement. The Valorian commander realized that his species' position as the galaxy's premier military force was no longer assured. They had been practicing warfare as an honored tradition while humans had developed it as a practical discipline focused entirely on achieving results. The implications of this discovery would reshape military thinking throughout the known galaxy for generations to come. 3 weeks after the battle, Zethkar sat alone in his quarters aboard the Valorian flagship, staring at the blank document that would change everything his people believed about warfare. The report he was preparing would revolutionize Valorian military doctrine and establish humanity as a force to be respected throughout the galaxy. More importantly, it would acknowledge that the Valorians were no longer the supreme military power they had believed themselves to be for centuries. The journey back to Valorian space had given him time to process everything he had witnessed during the encounter with the swarm, Captain Morrison, and his crew had departed with full military honors from the Valorian fleet, but not before establishing permanent communication protocols between their species. The humans had proposed joint training exercises, shared research projects, and strategic cooperation agreements that would have seemed impossible before their first meeting. Dr. Walsh had provided Zethkar with detailed records of human military history that painted a picture of warfare unlike anything in Valorian experience. Humans had fought countless conflicts throughout their development, not for honor or glory, but for survival, resources, and ideological principles that transcended individual achievement. Their military evolution had been driven by necessity rather than tradition, creating adaptive strategies that could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds through intelligence and innovation. The data showed that humans approached each conflict as a unique problem requiring specific solutions rather than variations on established themes. They studied their enemies with scientific precision, identified weaknesses that others might overlook, and developed tactics that exploited those vulnerabilities regardless of whether such methods aligned with traditional military honor. Victory was the only consideration that mattered, achieved through whatever means proved most effective. Lieutenant Rodriguez had shared tactical manuals that revealed the depth of human strategic thinking. Their military academies taught concepts that had no equivalent in Valorian education: psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale, economic strategies that targeted supply lines and industrial capacity, diplomatic maneuvers that isolated opponents from potential allies, and technological innovations that created temporary advantages in specific situations. What impressed Zethkar most was the human understanding of warfare as a temporary condition that should be ended as quickly as possible, rather than prolonged for its own sake. Their strategies were designed to achieve decisive results that would prevent future conflicts, not to provide opportunities for warriors to prove their individual worth. They fought to win and then to establish lasting peace, not to maintain a cycle of honorable combat between respected opponents. The more Zethkar studied human methods, the more he realized that his own species had been practicing a form of elaborate theater rather than effective military science. Valorian warriors fought for personal honor and cultural validation, following rules and traditions that limited their effectiveness in favor of maintaining social values. The humans fought to protect their civilization and achieve strategic objectives, adapting their methods to whatever circumstances required. Captain Morrison had demonstrated this philosophy repeatedly during their brief partnership. His decisions were based entirely on tactical effectiveness rather than personal glory or cultural expectations. When Squadron Leader Carter volunteered for her suicide mission, Morrison had accepted her sacrifice not because it was honorable but because it was necessary for victory. The human captain carried the weight of that decision without seeking praise or attempting to share responsibility with his subordinates. The contrast with Valorian command structure was stark and troubling. Valorian officers competed for opportunities to prove their individual worth in combat, sometimes making tactical decisions based on personal honor rather than military effectiveness. Their rigid hierarchy prevented junior officers from contributing innovative ideas that might challenge established doctrine. The emphasis on individual achievement often worked against coordinated efforts that required personal sacrifice for collective goals. As Zethkar began writing his report, he struggled with how to explain these concepts to the Valorian High Command without undermining their fundamental cultural beliefs. The military caste that ruled his society had built their authority on the assumption that Valorian warrior traditions represented the pinnacle of military evolution, acknowledging that a small, technologically inferior species had developed superior combat methods would challenge the very foundation of their civilization, yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had achieved something that no other species in the galaxy had managed. They had defeated a major swarm incursion with minimal losses while preventing the enemy from gathering intelligence about their capabilities. The tactical innovation, strategic thinking, and personal sacrifice demonstrated during the battle represented a new standard for military effectiveness that other species would need to match or surpass. The implications extended far beyond simple military tactics. Human approaches to warfare suggested different ways of organizing society, training military personnel, and approaching international relations. Their emphasis on collective effort over individual achievement, practical results over traditional methods, and adaptive thinking over established doctrine offered lessons that could benefit every aspect of Valorian civilization. Zethkar realized that his report would do more than acknowledge human military capabilities. It would begin a fundamental transformation of how his people understood their place in the galaxy. The Valorians had believed themselves to be the natural leaders of galactic civilization based on their superior combat abilities. If humans could demonstrate more effective military methods, then Valorian claims to leadership would need to be reevaluated. The final section of his report contained recommendations that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Zethkar proposed immediate diplomatic negotiations to establish formal alliance agreements with humanity, joint military training programs that would expose Valorian officers to human tactical methods, technology sharing arrangements that would benefit both species, and strategic cooperation in future conflicts against threats like the Swarm. Most importantly, he recommended that the Valorian military academies begin studying human approaches to warfare as examples of innovation and effectiveness that transcended traditional combat doctrines. The lessons learned from humanity could help his people develop new strategies that combined Valorian strength and honor with human intelligence and adaptability. As he completed the document that would reshape his civilization's understanding of warfare, Zethkar reflected on the words that would become his legacy. The closing paragraph summarized everything he had learned from his encounter with humanity and established principles that would guide Valorian military thinking for generations to come. He wrote carefully, knowing that these words would be quoted in military academies and strategic planning sessions throughout the galaxy. I thought I understood war, ritualized combat between honorable warriors, seeking individual glory through displays of personal courage and cultural superiority. Then I saw humans fight and learned that true warfare is the complete commitment of an entire species to achieving victory through any means necessary, accepting any sacrifice required, and applying intelligence rather than strength to overcome seemingly impossible odds. We are no longer the galaxy's greatest warriors. We are students, and humanity is our teacher. The report would mark the beginning of a new era in galactic warfare, one where victory belonged not to the strongest or most traditional military forces, but to those species capable of adapting their methods to meet whatever challenges the universe presented. The humans had shown that the future of conflict lay not in individual heroism or cultural traditions, but in collective intelligence, innovative thinking, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for objectives that transcended personal achievement.